Welcome to Gluten-free Bread 101. Today we are joined by two guest speakers, wheat bread and gluten-free bread. Let's open the floor to some questions. Question 1. Wheat bread, tell us something about yourself, please.
Well, I contain gluten, which is a protein made up of glutenin and gliadin proteins that are joined together when dough is kneaded. Gluten's function in bread is to contribute to the elastic matrix that forms my structure when water is added. The CO2 that is produced by yeast will be trapped within this matrix, and therefore, when I am baked, these gas bubbles expand, and this explains my light, chewy texture.
Gluten-free bread, what are some specific regulations and standards in Canada?
For me to be defined as gluten-free, the Food and Drugs Regulations Act states that I cannot contain a gluten content of more than 20 parts per million. This just means that for every 20 parts of gluten, there must be 1 million parts of product. This ratio results in almost zero traces of gluten. According to the same act, gluten is any gluten protein from barley, rye, and wheat. Oats do not naturally contain gluten. However, they are easily and commonly contaminated by gluten during processing and manufacturing.
So, wheat bread, how is the gluten normally digested inside the body?
During the normal digestive process, when gluten is ingested, it dissolves into gliadin, glutenin, and other nutrients. After passing from the stomach into the small intestine, the mucosa has lining cells that absorb the gliadin. These are the cells that begin its metabolism, and because the gliadin is too big to pass through the intestinal wall, the enzyme transglutaminase breaks down some of the amino acids. The end result is deaminated gliadin that then moves on to other cells for further digestion and metabolism. However, this is different for people with celiac disease.
What happens when people with celiac disease eat gluten? And do we even need gluten-free bread?
The importance of gluten-free bread is especially relevant for people with celiac disease. This is because when they ingest gluten, they are unable to digest it normally, and an autoimmune response will be triggered within their body. This means that the body will reject the proteins and other nutrients instead of absorbing them, and this ends up damaging the villi that line the small intestine. And this results in inflammation, bloating, and other uncomfortable symptoms such as diarrhea and intestinal cramps.
What ingredients are you made out of? And can you please describe the process used to make you?
We are made from similar ingredients, the key ones being flour, yeast, water, and salt. Flour is a key ingredient that adds bulk and structure to us. I am made with wheat flour that contains gluten.
And I am made with ground flours from a variety of gluten-free materials such as almonds, coconut, rice, soy, legumes, and sorghum, just to name a few. Since my flour lacks gluten, it does not provide the same elastic matrix when mixed with water and can be difficult to retain my shape as I rise, and therefore I may be less fluffy. However, additives that are used to mimic the elasticity, chewy texture, and fluffiness properties of gluten are xanthan gum, gar gum, cornstarch, eggs, and fruit pectin.
Yeast is the driving force of fermentation, which allows for leavening of bread. Yeast uses the sugars from the flour and oxygen in the dough to produce carbon dioxide gas. The carbon dioxide makes the dough rise, which gives the bread a light and spongy texture.
Water is used to produce the dough. It is important that the correct quantity of water is used when making bread because it affects the dispersal of the other ingredients.
Salt is an essential ingredient in bread. It is used in very small amounts to give bread flavor. It also assists fermentation to produce bread of good volume and texture. Although a key ingredient, salt should not come in direct contact with the yeast as it risks killing the yeast. There are 4 key steps in the bread making process. Once the ingredients have been measured, they are mixed to form dough, and the dough is kneaded. Kneading involves pushing and pulling the dough with the original purpose of stretching and strengthening the gluten in the dough. However, in the case of gluten-free bread, kneading is still important to incorporate gums and other gas-retaining additives that mimic the properties of gluten.
The next step is called proofing. This is the main fermentation and is essential for developing the bread structure and flavor. During this step, the yeast is activated by the liquid and begins to feed on the sugars from flour, releasing carbon dioxide bubbles. Replacement gums produce products trap these gas bubbles, which would be trapped normally by gluten. Also, more alcohol and acids are produced, which flavor the bread.
After proofing, the dough is shaped and ready to be baked. The goal of baking is to gelatinize or cook the dough and to achieve good volume and an attractive crust.
It is important to allow bread to cool all the way to complete the cooking process before cutting and storing. I should be stored in an airtight container or bag at room temperature. Please don't put me in the refrigerator, as my starch will crystallize and I will lose my moisture holding abilities and I will go stale more rapidly. Freezing me is also an option. Most all of my current properties and nutrients will be preserved and I can last for at least 3 months.
Thanks, and I hope you had fun learning about gluten-free bread. Goodbye.